purport. Only the self-controlled can gradually be attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Self-controlled means not indulging in sense enjoyment more than is necessary. And those who are not self-controlled are given over to sense enjoyment. Dry philosophical speculation is a subtle sense enjoyment of the mind. Sense enjoyment leads one to the path of darkness. Those who are self-controlled can make progress on the path of liberation from the conditional life of material existence. The Vedas therefore enjoin that one should not go on the path of darkness, but should make a progressive march towards the path of light or liberation. Self-control is actually achieved not by artificially stopping the senses from material enjoyment, but by becoming factually attached to the Supreme Lord, by engaging one's unalloyed senses in the transcendental service of the Lord. The senses cannot be forcibly curbed, but they can be given proper engagement. Purified senses, therefore, are always engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord. This perfection stage of sense engagement is called Bhakti Yoga. So those who are attached to the means of Bhakti Yoga are factually self-controlled and can all of a sudden give up their homely or bodily attachment for the service of the Lord. This is called the Paramahamsa stage. Hamsas, or swans, accept only milk out of a mixture of milk and water. Similarly, those who accept the service of the Lord instead of Maya's service are called the Paramahamsas. They are naturally qualified with all the good attributes such as pridelessness, freedom from vanity, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, respectability, worship, devotion, and sincerity. All these godly qualities exist in the devotee of the Lord spontaneously. Such Paramahamsas who are completely given up to the service of the Lord are very rare. They are very rare even amongst the liberated souls. Real non-violence means freedom from envy. In this world, everyone is envious of his fellow being, but a perfect Paramahamsa, being completely given up of the service of the Lord, is perfectly non-envious. He loves every living being in relation with the Supreme Lord. Real renunciation means perfect dependence on God. Every living being is dependent on someone else because he is so made. Actually, everyone is dependent on the mercy of the Supreme Lord, but when one forgets his relation with the Lord, he becomes dependent on the conditions of the material nature. Renunciation means renouncing one's dependence on the conditions of material nature and thus becoming completely dependent on the mercy of the Lord. Real independence means complete faith in the mercy of the Lord without dependence on the conditions of matter. This Paramahamsa stage is the highest perfection of stage in Bhakti Yoga, the process of devotional service to the Supreme Lord. Hare Krishna. So quite a long purport. So if I may ask before I start, whilst I was reading, is there any key words that you heard or you came across? So before we even start discussing, what are the kind of things do you think has been talked about in this verse?
Paramhansa.
Paramahamsa, yes. So the definition of a Paramahamsa, yes. Anything else that stood out in this verse?
Envy.
Yes, yes. What does the first part? So there are two distinct parts of this verse. Well, I say distinct, but they actually overlap and they are talked about in the purport. They are all talked about at the same time together. So when we do the discussions, we are going to talk about it more or less together because one is dependent on the other. But is there any other key word or key phrase that you heard?
Sense enjoyment.
Yes, and directly related to that, it's self-control, isn't it?
Yes.
So they talk about, yes, Prasamatma, Prabhuji, you were saying something? You unmuted yourself.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, it's okay. I wanted to say self-control.
Self-control, yes. So self-control, and then they talk about the Paramahamsas, and then right at the end, it is the renunciators or renunciation. So these are some of the key things that are talked about in this verse. But before we do that, a very, very quick recap of what we've done so far in a couple of very, very quickly. So we've been seeing the sages of Naimisharanya requesting Sutta Goswami to tell them more about Parikshit Maharaj, and then they say how qualified Sutta Goswami is. I mean, who better a person to hear about the Bhagavatam than him, a pure devotee, and they hear about Krishna, and how Krishna, they ask him why Krishna is the supreme, and to tell them more about Krishna, and why, and all about him. And in the verse yesterday, we heard about continuing on the glorification of Krishna. We heard about we heard about chanting, why it's just the perfection, and there's no gatiranyata. This is the only way of kalo nashti, eva nashti, eva nashti, eva gatiranyata. Chanting is the only way that can take us out of Kali Yuga. And we continued on that glorification of the Lord's name. And we also heard yesterday about how Mother Ganga came to the earth, and how she was brought to the earth again whilst glorifying the Lord, how Vamandeva pierced the upper layer of the universe, which led to a few trickle of a bit of water from the causal ocean to drip into the material universe. And that came through the heavenly planets. And the heavenly planets, it's called Mandakini, came to the earth as River Ganges. And there's also the beautiful pastime around how the river Ganges had to be held in Lord Shiva's hair, because she came down with so much force that the King Bhagirath, who requested Lord Shiva, who performed the sacrifice and prayed to Lord Shiva so that he could bring down Mother Ganges, and with the water of Mother Ganges purify the ashes of his ancestors, so that the souls of the ancestors could be liberated, because they were cursed by Kapil Muni, and they were turned into ashes. So I'm not going to go into this pastime, because I think that will have been covered. But if later on, or if you want me to expand on this pastime, do let me know, because it's quite a lovely pastime of King Bhagirath. But I have a feeling this has been covered already. So this is where we talked, where yesterday's verse, Prabhuji was also talking about how Mother Ganga descends, and how she is a pure devotee, a pure devotee of the Lord. And how she purifies everything in the material universe, and whoever comes in contact with her. And continuing with that strand, with that thread of talking about pure devotees, we come into today's verse, and we talk about some of the qualities of a pure devotees, a Paramahamsa, and how they are self-controlled, and how they're able to be a perfect, and how they can perfectly renounce material things. But there are ways to self-control. There are ways of self-controlling oneself, and there are ways of renouncing things. It's just not random, and it can't be done by anybody. Guru Kripa Prabhu was one of the close devotees, close disciples of Prabhupada. One day in his memoirs, he was talking about how one day, or one night rather, in the middle of the night, Prabhupada called for him. He was sleeping, and Prabhupada was loudly calling for him. So he just woke up in a rush, and he rushed to Prabhupada's room, and Prabhupada said, "What are you doing? What were you doing?" And he said, "Prabhupada, I was sleeping." "Why were you sleeping?" I said, "Prabhupada, it's the middle of the night." And Prabhupada said, "But I'm not sleeping. I'm working, I'm writing. Why are you sleeping?" And Guru Kripa Prabhu said, "But Prabhupada, you're a pure devotee. You can do that." And Prabhupada said, "Why are you not a pure devotee? Why can't you do that?" And Guru Kripa Prabhu said, I had no answer. So he then asked Prabhupada, "Prabhupada, what should I do now?" And then Prabhupada said, "Go back to sleep." And so he said, "Okay." So I went back to sleep. And you see over here, we come across quite a few things. We come across a pure devotee who's always thinking about Krishna. And we also come across another devotee as well, but someone who's not yet able to control all of his senses, and still that is the reason he couldn't give any answer to Prabhupada as to why he was feeling sleepy at night, whereas Prabhupada wasn't, after a whole day of being very, very busy, an elderly man who probably did more work than everybody together, everybody else, but he wasn't sleeping, he was still working. So we get a glimpse of a pure devotee, and throughout the Shastras we come across so many pure devotees, and one bigger and more of a pure devotee than the other. We've come across words like Mahabhagavats in our verses before. But then when talking about pure devotees, and we kind of mentioned that, yes, the pure devotees do have self-control of their senses. Even before we go into self-control, let's look into what are they self-controlling themselves from? What is the attachment, or what are the attachment? So if I throw this question to all of you, what is attachment? When we say we are attached, we can't be a pure devotee. What do we mean by that?
So probably when you say self-control, we can't control our senses, and the five senses, as we know, would be, we can't control when we see food, so we can't control when we, and the other senses of touch, eyes, we can't control what we see. So those five senses, but I was more thinking about, in my case, is the sleep. I need to sleep those many hours, and if I could sleep a little less, then I would be really grateful. So I do not know whether I've answered your question, but
no, yes, thank you, Mataji. Thank you. That's great. Yes, you're absolutely right. So when we say we are attached to our material senses. So anything to do with our gross body, our gross body. So whether it's to do with eyes, what we see, we want to watch some programs, and we can't get ourselves away from certain TV programs, or ears, what we hear, nose, tongue, what we taste, a sense of touch. So anything and everything to do with our sense gratification. So attachment can be of two types. One is to do with the gross body, to do with the five senses and all enjoyment attached to the five senses. And the other is actually quite subtle because it's related to a subtle body of mind, intelligence, and false ego. And one of the things could be, say, for example, you do crossword puzzles every single morning, or you're a mathematician and you can solve great problems which others cannot. So where you speculate or you guess or you find answers and you're able to do that, you ask questions and you get answers in your mind. And if you don't get answers, you further speculate, you further try to get that knowledge and you find out. And in finding out the answer or resolving a problem or finding a solution, you get pleasure out of it because it's feeding the pleasure buds of your mind, of your intelligence, and of your ego. Yes, I can do it. The others were not able to do that. I could do that. That is also self-sense gratification. That is also an attachment. Because it's our mind, intelligence, and false ego, it's a subtle body. It is also material. So attachment to that is also an attachment. So it is not just attachment of the five senses of the gross body. So when we are talking about self-control, we are wanting to get above all of these, both the gross body and the subtle body, and make progress so that, beyond this, for us to really look into what self-control means. So so we can say that self-control, if you look into a definition of self-control, the acharyas say that self-control is when we are not indulging in sense enjoyment that is more than what is necessary for us to live in this world. So it is exactly what is required for us to exist, a life as prescribed by the Vedas, by the Shastras, not indulging in anything more. And the Vedas, they advise us to march progressively towards the path of liberation or light. The more we are attached to these material or the gross or the subtle attachment, these will hold us back. And what we don't want is artificial self-control, because the senses, whether it's our gross senses or the subtle senses, they cannot be forcibly curbed. Okay, our senses, they need to be engaged. Just like we say, people who are liberated, they go to the Brahmajyoti, they merge into the Brahman and Brahmajyoti. But the inherent nature of souls is to be active, to engage in something. And when you are merged into the Brahma Jyoti, you're not doing anything. You're not serving the Lord. It's in the spiritual world. So there's nothing material, but you're not doing any karma. You're not practicing karma yoga, Gyan yoga, and you're not even practicing bhakti yoga because you can't even serve the Lord because you're not doing anything. And because the souls are inactive, they fall down. There's the tendency to fall down because they're inactive. So the soul, the souls, they need to be engaged in the right way. So when we are in the material world, we are covered with material energy. What we tend to do is our souls get attached to material things, material enjoyments, and that is what curbs our self-control. If we are able to go above this or beyond this, we will be making progress towards becoming a pure devotee or becoming a devotee, yes, or towards, or at least start our journey in the path of bhakti. Now, as I said, it cannot be forced. You cannot forcibly curb your senses because you need to engage your soul in some way. And and to do that, rather than engage the soul in the material way, we need to engage them in bhakti for the Lord's service. And that is bhakti yoga, and that is what is prescribed to us. And then the purport says that, you know, people, or the translation and the purport says that people who are able to do that, people who have perfected the bhakti yoga, they are able to all of a sudden give up everything. They give up everything, and they are able to completely detach themselves and go back to Godhead, as advised by the God, or as prescribed by the Lord. And we see in the example of Parikshit Maharaj, he had everything, and he had a lot of work to do at hand because he was the ruler, but he was able to give up everything just like that, because he understood that that was the Lord's will, and he needed to do that, and he didn't question that. He was a pure devotee. I mean, if he wanted to, he could have taken the curse back, but he didn't. We see the same in the example of Bharat Maharaj, who later on in his later life becomes Jara Bharat. But we see Bharat Maharaj, and we'll come to read about him later. We read a bit about him earlier, but we'll come to read about him later as well. How he was able to give up everything, all his kingdom, all his opulences, all his riches, family, and he just wanted to serve the Lord, and he left and went to the forest, just giving up everything. Okay, now this is what the Paramahamsas does. The Paramahamsas are able to leave everything, and that is how they define the verse talks to us about the Paramahamsas, and the verse says that this a stage where you reach pure bhakti, so much so that you're able to completely control your senses in such a way that you become so detached that you're able to give up all attachments that you have in a second. And that is the Paramahamsa stage. And we are given the example of a hamsa, or a swan, or swans, hamsas, who out of a mixture of milk and water, they are able to accept only the milk and leave the water aside. If they drink the drink that is of higher quality. They drink the milk rather than water. So similarly, the Paramahamsas who become pure devotees, they are immediately able to detach from the lower attachments, the gross attachments, and able to attach themselves to the Lord, and immediately leave everything and detach themselves from all things material and anything related to this material world. And they, whether they continue to live in this material world as King Bharat did, or they prepare to go back to the spiritual world as Parikshit Maharaj did. But they are able to immediately, in their mind, give up or detach themselves from all sense enjoyments. And that is how they are the perfect examples of people in self-control. We are further given further qualities about Paramahamsas, and we are told that the Paramahamsas, they are prideless. They don't have any pride or vanity. They are tolerant. They are simple, and they are respectable, sincere, and their main quality is that they are pure bhaktas, or pure devotees. And Paramahamsas, true Paramahamsas, they are rare, even amongst liberated souls. So you find lots of liberated souls, but even amongst those liberated souls, it is very, very difficult to find a Paramahamsa, someone who's completely self-controlled and completely detached. Now, we talk about this, we've only started with our class, and we've already talked about attachment and detachment and attachment and detachment. What is this attachment and what is this detachment? Now, Rupa Goswami, in his Nectar of Instructions, he talks about Yukta Vairagya. Has anyone heard about that? Yukta Vairagya?
Yes, Mataji, I think a lot of speakers have spoken about Yukta Vairagya, but probably you can remind us again.
Okay. Does anyone remember anything? So,
accepting everything in the service of Krishna.
yes, Prabhuji, yes, thank you. So, Yukta Vairagya. Vairagya is renunciation, but it's also Yukta, it's attaching. So, how do we do that? So, there are two steps to it. So, first of all, Rupa Goswami says that, when we are talking about self-controlling ourselves or attaching ourselves or detaching ourselves, it's not an immediate process. There are steps to it. You cannot just decide today that, okay, from tomorrow, I'm going to be self-controlled. I'm going to give up everything and I'm only going to think about Krishna. That is impossible. That is not possible to do. There are steps to it, and we have to prepare our mind and body to it. And the first step is to be detached from these sense enjoyments, to be able to self-control, not forcibly, but wantingly, wanting to go or get away from all things material or anything material, and do it slowly so that you don't fall back. Just like we talk about Maharaj Bharat again, so how he got attached to a deer and he fell back. He was taken away from being a pure devotee. He fell back into material attachment. So the first step is to become detached from material engagement, and then you attach yourself to Krishna consciousness or doing things for Krishna. So there are two steps. There is the vairagya, there's the detachment or yukta vairagya. So the first, you detach yourself and then you attach yourself to Krishna and all things to Krishna. So this is how we can practice in our life. And as Rupa Goswami says, and further acharyas explaining Rupa Goswami's verses tell us that this is a practice that is not possible immediately. This detachment and attachment, it will lead us to the path, or in the path of bhakti, it will lead us to pure bhakti. But we really, really have to practice this and do it in a proper order, so that we don't give up everything forcefully and then fall back again. And real renunciation is not just giving up everything. It is that perfect dependence on God and the mercy of the Lord. Okay, so when we are talking about the Paramahamsa, the two things that come out is that the ahimsa, Paramahamsa, the Paramahamsa practices non-violence or ahimsa, and the Paramahamsa also practices renunciation or upasana. So these are very, very rare. Now, when we are talking about Paramahamsa, and non-violence is one of the qualities given of the Paramahamsa in the Prabhupada. What do we mean by non-violence? To become a Paramahamsa and to practice non-violence, it is being free from envy, and that is the main thing, envy. Anger and envy. In this world, everybody is envious of the other person. I mean, sometimes we don't even realize, but we are actually envious of the other person. But the Paramahamsa loves every living being as their own and in relation to God. And that is also, and then we see in the case of Prabhupada how, being a pure bhakta of Paramahamsa, he didn't, he would go to anyone and everyone. He went to people who the others, even in America, the other Americans, they looked down upon, but Prabhupada embraced them and he made them pure devotees. And that is the quality of the Paramahamsa. So to them, as it is said in Maha Upanishad, which is one of the minor Upanishads, it says that Vasudeva Kutumbakam. Have you heard of this before? I'm sure you have. Vasudeva Kutumbakam, or the world is one family. Okay, everyone in this world is together and we are one family because we are all connected to Krishna. And that is what a Paramahamsa is. Krishna is perfect. Krishna is perfect in himself. Okay, the only thing he really lacks and doesn't have is that feeling of bhakti from his bhaktas, from his devotees, and he's really, really wanting that all the time. So if we are able to do that, if we are able to make progress and self-control our senses and go beyond this material existence, we become a pure bhakta because we are able to give Krishna that pleasure of love. We are able to love Krishna without having love for other things which are not related to Krishna. And as soon as Krishna feels that love from us, that is when we become a pure bhakta. That is not when we think we are a pure bhakta. It's when Krishna feels our love for him in his heart. That is when one qualifies as a Paramahamsa or as a pure bhakta. So we have this beautiful pastime of Ramananda Raya and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Ramananda Mahaprabhu met Ramananda Raya in South India, and they entered into a discussion where hopefully we'll be able to do that. It's a beautiful discussion between Mahaprabhu and Ramananda Raya, where Mahaprabhu actually becomes a student and questions or gives a series of questions to Ramananda Raya and asks him quite a few questions from very basic up to reaching to pure bhakti, and even after reaching pure bhakti right up to Radharani. And Mahaprabhu kept asking questions to him. And then whilst he was answering, Mahaprabhu was sitting there, and this went on for quite a few days, and Mahaprabhu would sit in front of Ramananda Raya with his danda, with his sannyas danda. And then one day he was sitting like that. And then what Mahaprabhu did was very stealthily. Now, Ramananda Raya, we are told by Acharyas, in Krishna Leela, he was Arjuna. And we are also told that he's also a part incarnation of either the Gopi Lalita Sakhi, or Vishaka Sakhi. Some believe it's Lalita Sakhi, some believe it's Vishaka Sakhi, but he was also in Krishna Leela, he was also Arjuna. So he was, a close associate of Krishna. So coming back to Mahaprabhu's Leela, so what he did, he was sitting in front of Ramananda Raya, and slowly he picked up a flute. He just made a flute, and he started playing that. His golden complexion turned to bluish black, and he in front of Ramananda Raya, he was holding his flute, leaving his danda. And Ramananda Raya, he was giving answers, and then he looked up all of a sudden, and he saw Krishna. And he said, okay, fine, I think I am going mad. He looked down again, he was answering, he looked up again, and he saw Krishna. And then he was about to ask something, and then Mahaprabhu changed back to his golden color again. And this happened a few times. And then Ramananda Raya says, what is happening, Mahaprabhu? Why am I seeing Krishna? Who are you? I'm seeing Krishna because I'm seeing Shyam Sundar with his flute. But the very next moment I'm seeing you. And then Mahaprabhu, again, he was playing, he knew Ramananda Raya was a pure devotee, and he was obviously playing with him, but at the same time, he didn't want to stop the flow of questions and answer, because he was being the student over there. And he said, oh, you Vaishnavas, you see Krishna everywhere. You see Krishna everywhere. You want to please Krishna. You love Krishna so much. So you're just seeing Krishna in me. And he turned the conversation. But that is what a pure devotee does to Krishna. That is what a Paramahamsa does to Krishna. So they make Krishna so happy that Krishna wants to embrace them as himself and wants to make them happy. And you know, even if he's caught, he doesn't care if he's caught in that, because what he wants to do is he wants to be defeated by his devotees, and that is who a Paramahamsa is, someone who's able to make Krishna happy, because he's so self-controlled. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, and also in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, there is a verse in 1.1.12 which says that bhakti or devotional service means engaging all our senses in the service of the Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And when the spirit soul renders service unto the Supreme, there are two side effects. One is freed from the material designations, and one's senses are purified simply by being engaged or employed in the service of the Lord. So we understand from what it says in Chaitanya Charitamrita that our senses, they always want to be designated to some kind of activity. But to free us from these material designations and to purify ourselves and to purify our senses for the service of the Lord, only for the service of the Lord. And that is true self-control. Self-control is not, I'm giving up, as for me, like I'm giving up eating chocolates tomorrow. That is not self-control. Self-control is when you are able to divert your attentions from anything that you do to make you happy, and you divert that attention to making Krishna happy. That is true self-control. And that is when the senses become purified and all the material contaminations, they go away, because we are engaged only in appreciating and doing anything for Krishna, in the consciousness of Krishna, and not just giving up things for personal reasons. And we again, one of the other things that we go back to Ramananda Raya and Mahaprabhu again, just conscious of the time, 15 minutes, going back to Mahaprabhu and Ramananda Raya again, we see in their conversation, one of the things that Ramananda Raya says, that that Mahaprabhu, one can worship, one can be completely self-controlled, and one can worship Vishnu by following Varna and Ashram perfectly. So the Vedas say that, you know, we have to follow Varna and Ashram. That is what the Vedas prescribe us. So if one in the material world, if one is actually able to perfectly follow Varna Ashram, then they will be self-controlled and they will become a pure devotee. And Mahaprabhu actually negates that, and he says, he rejects this, and he says, but Ramananda Raya, that is not true, because you can regulate your gross and your subtle bodies, your subtle senses. You can regulate that. You can forcefully stop that, or even if not forcefully, you can stop that. But how does that automatically ensure that by doing so, by regulating your senses and by living in a perfect varnashram system, you perfectly follow whichever varna you're in? You do your duties according to your varna. You do your duties according to your ashram, whether you're a grihastha or brahmachari or vanaprastha or sannyas, or if you're a brahmin, kshatriya, vaishya, or a shudra, you perfectly follow the duties prescribed in varna and ashram. But how does that automatically ensure that you're engaging your senses in bhakti, that you're engaging your senses in the service of the Lord? So just by following Varna and Ashram does not automatically by default make you a pure Bhakta, make you a Paramahamsa, make you self-controlled. That is not true self-control. So self-control is self-control, or true self-control is when the purpose of that self-control is to engage your senses from being controlled from material senses, but engage them in serving the Lord. And again, we see in Srimad Bhagavatam in first canto chapter 2, which we have read before, we have seen the Lord, Sutta Goswami saying that the occupational activities a man performs according to his own position are only so much useless labor if they do not provoke attraction for the message of the personality of Godhead. So the occupation of a man is absolutely fruitless labor, useless labor, if they do not attract any engagement towards Krishna. So even if one is following the Vedic injunctions, if one is not following the purpose of the Vedas, and what is the purpose of the Vedas? Bhagavad Gita tells us in 15:15, in chapter 15:15, that Vedas cha sarver aham eva vedyo. Apologies again for my awful Sanskrit pronunciation. But the Vedas say in Bhagavad Gita, and Krishna says in the Purushottam chapter in 15:15, that by all the Vedas I am to be known. So the Vedas prescribe Varnashram, but what do the Vedas say? By all the Vedas, Krishna says, by all the Vedas I am to be known. So all the Vedic injunctions, the only purpose of all of them is to know Krishna, to understand Krishna. So if you're just following the instructions of the Vedas but do not understand it, it is all going to just be useless labor. So again, we go back to, how do we connect all of this self-control, detachment, attachment, and become a Paramahamsa, become a pure devotee? Have you heard about Vivekananda? Vivekananda?
Yes, and
Okay.
his guru was Ramakrishna Paramhansa.
That's right. Yes, Mataji. Yes, thank you. So Vivekananda, when he was in America, I mean, he did that famous speech in Chicago. But after that speech, he became quite well known, and he was asked by a journalist. Now, you said something about contact and connection in your discussion and in your lecture. I didn't quite understand it. What do you mean by that? Vivekananda, he looked at the journalist, and he instead of answering the question, he asked the journalist, have you got, you're a young person, have you got parents? Where do they live? Do you contact your parents all the time? And the journalist said, yes, sometimes. How often? Let's say once in a month. Do you get together? Do you have brothers and sisters? Do you get together? Yes, we do. Some live far, some live near. Yes, maybe once in a few months, once in a year. And then Vivekananda asked, when you actually do meet your parents or your brothers and sisters, do you sit down together, have breakfast and lunch together, and dinner and supper together? Do you talk about old times? Do you share laughter and tears? And by that time, when the journalist, initially he was thinking, why is this man asking me strange questions and personal questions about myself when I asked him something about his discussion? But then by the end, when Vivekananda was asking him continuous questions about, how attached he is to his family, he was in tears. He was in tears, and Vivekananda said, you see, you have contact with your parents, you have contact with your brothers and sisters, but what exactly is your connection? So are you connected to them? So when we say self-control is not just being in contact with somebody or being in contact with our material senses or disconnecting with our material senses. That is not self-control, but self-control is that connection with the Lord, of diverting all of that to being attached to the Lord, of creating that attachment with the Lord. And that is what pure self-control is. That is what pure detachment is. We see in the example of Pundarika Vidyanidhi, one of the very, very close associates of Mahaprabhu, who was very rich, and Gadadhar Pandit, who was none other than Radharani in Chaitanya Lila. Gadadhar Pandit, when he saw Pundarika Vidyanidhi for the first time, he was very, he didn't even want to stay there. And when he came back to Mahaprabhu said, go back, and you're going to, go back and see who he is. And Mahaprabhu actually told Gadadhar Pandit off. And then Gadadhar Pandit, he just couldn't understand why Mahaprabhu continued saying that he's such a good person. So he went back to Pundarika Vidyanidhi's place. And then he saw, he recited a verse. It was either, I can't remember exactly, but either him or somebody else recited a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. And Pundarika Vidyanidhi, he just went into a trance. He just went into a complete trance, and Gadadhar Pandit realized just how big a devotee he was, so much so that he accepted him as his guru and nobody else, but he wanted him as his guru because he could see in front of him, he could see, despite being surrounded by riches of all types and all kinds, just how detached the man is, because as soon as it was Krishna's words, nothing else really mattered to him. So even living in complete opulence, surrounded by riches, one could be completely detached. And we see so many examples in so many pure devotees, whether it's King Ambarish, whether we see Parikshit Maharaj, and whether we see, Prahlad Maharaj, who was a prince. We see so many devotees throughout the ages. Even the Pandavas were so pure devotees. Such pure devotees, and that is what detachment is. Again, just to very, very quickly recap, yukta vairagya, or detachment or self-controlling, is not just, it's having just giving up everything, but having control over one's senses before coming to the bhakti platform. And first giving up attachment to material things, and then fixing your consciousness upon Krishna. So whether you're following karma yoga, or you're a karmi and doing lots of work, or you are a jnani and you're speculating and you're wanting to satisfy your mind and senses and subtle senses, you have to detach yourself from that before you're able to reach bhakti. And Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that karmanyavadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. You have the right to work only, but never to its fruit. So do not concentrate on the fruit. Okay, so just fix your mind upon me and engage all your intelligence in me. And that is what Krishna says to Arjuna in 12.8 in Bhagavad Gita. And again, in Bhagavad Gita 5.23, Krishna says that one of the key things is to tolerate when you are being when you're controlling your senses, but tolerate and curb your senses in what? As the purport tells us, to tolerate our anger, to tolerate our calm and krodh, because you have to, unless you tolerate or control your anger, there is no way that you can become self-controlled. And we come to the last part of becoming a pure renunciate. renunciate. So renunciation, as Krishna again says in the Bhagavad Gita and in this purport again, renunciation can be in the mode of ignorance, where you just are fed up with life and you just want to give everything up and, leave everything, and you don't understand and you fall back again. And we see, lots of people just wanting to become sannyas. Apparently, when Prabhupada was there, every other person wanted to become a sannyasi because that was fashion, and they didn't want to take the responsibility of life, and they wanted to give up everything. But that is giving up, renunciation in ignorance, and that is not the right way to do it. Renunciation, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, can also be in the mode of passion. Like Arjuna, he was fed up. He just didn't. He was attached to his material senses, and he did not want to fight. He just wanted to run away, and did not want to fight his relatives. But he was a devotee, but he still didn't want to. He was still attached to his material, his relatives, and he didn't want to give up anything. And that he was doing that. He was saying things in passion, and that is. He just said, I'm just going to go to the forest and leave everything. That is better than fighting my relatives. And that is renunciation in passion. That is not what we want. Renunciation can also be in goodness, but not pure goodness, like we see in Dhritarashtra. Yes, Dhritarashtra, isn't it? Yes, Dhritarashtra, when Vidur says quite harsh things to him, and he gives up. Vidur says, you're still staying with the Pandavas. You've put them through so much pain, and you're just staying like an animal who's being fed bits from somebody. And Dhritarashtra leaves Yudhishthir's kingdom, and he goes to the forest to become a yogi. Now that is, he actually understood. So he left everything in goodness because he wanted to attach to the Lord. But that was not pure goodness. He could become calm, he could become dear, but he couldn't attain Narottama because he had offended the Vaishnavas, the Pandavas. So although he did it in goodness, it was not in pure goodness. So what is the solution? The solution is devotional renunciation. And that is what the verse ends on. That is what we should do. Like Raghunath Das Goswami, who was one of the associates of Krishna, of Mahaprabhu, very, very rich, but he just wanted to leave everything and just come to Mahaprabhu. I mean, initially Mahaprabhu said, go back and perform your duties as a grihastha, and then when you're ready, you come back. And that is what Krishna tells us, that don't renunciate, don't give up everything when you're not ready. So, like we see Maharaj Priyavrat, so where he gave up everything, but Lord Brahma said, no, come back to your kingdom, because that is what is required, because we need people we need the population, and it is the duty to increase population, and Maharaj Priyavrat, although he actually renounced renunciation. Why did he do that? He was able to do that just like that immediately, as the verse says. He was able to do just like that because he understood even giving up renunciation is a better renunciation, because that is the will of the Lord. Even if he has to go back to material world, he would do that because that is the will of the Lord. But he could do that perfectly because he was a pure devotee. And even being in Grihastha ashram, he could perfectly be self-controlled, and he could perfectly be a renunciate. And as Arjun says to Krishna right at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, that Krishna, I am ready to do what you say. I am yours. And he says, Karyesha vachanam tava, I shall act according to your instructions. And that is what true renunciation is. It is when you completely leave everything to the will of the Lord and do and say what the Lord asked you to do. And that is how you become completely self-controlled, because you're controlling your senses, you're working for the Lord, you're attaching yourself, you're detaching yourself from material things, but you're attaching yourself to the Lord, and you become a perfect renunciate. And that is what the verse teaches us today. That is who our pure Paramahamsa is. So with that, I conclude our discussion today. Please forgive me if I've made any mistakes.
Thank you very much, Mataji, for this excellent discussion, taking us from giving up the material attachment from gross body and subtle mind. Didn't realize that the subtle mind had a big role to play in giving up attachment and attaining yukta vairagya, and then the journey from by self-control from a normal person to a paramhansa. Mataji, I missed out on this story that I really enjoyed the pastime of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and
Ramananda Raya.
I didn't know that, so thank you for sharing that. That was really nice. You could just close your eyes and see how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was exchanging his forms. I didn't understand, I didn't get it when you said about this reporter or the journalist when he was asked, and he was said that yes, he knows, he touched base with his family and his brothers and sisters. I missed out that point. Mataji, can you just repeat that, please?
Yes, so it is connection and contact. It's contact and connection. So he was in contact with his parents, he was in contact with his brothers and sisters, but was he actually connecting with them? So what he was doing was that he was getting in touch because he was in contact with them. He was getting in touch, he was meeting them once in a while, just because it was a duty, sometimes even forcibly, because he has to meet them. And so he was meeting them. Similarly, if you try to self-control because it's a duty, because it's what we have been told to do, or because it is the right thing to do, it's like being in contact. We are doing it artificially. And that is not the right way to do it. The right way to do things is to connect. So if you are connecting with if you're contacting your parents or your brothers and sisters, are you really talking to them heart to heart? Are you connecting with them in your heart and soul? And that is what we need to do. When we practice self-control, we shouldn't do that just because we've been asked to do that or we need to do that, but we need to do that to be able to connect to Krishna, because being self-control, by diverting our attentions from material objects to our material sense gratification to the services of the Lord, we are connecting to the Lord. And that is what pure self-control is, and pure detachment is. Detaching with the material, attaching to Krishna.
Thank you so much. I misunderstood that. So I thought maybe he contacts his parents, but his duty was to connect them to Krishna. So, but now I understand what.
Sorry, Mataji, maybe I didn't explain properly before.
It was me, because I was catching up in writing, so I missed out that pastime. Okay, any other questions or comments? I know we are running out of time. Okay, if there are no questions or comments, Arya Govind Prabhu, is it possible for you to end this session, please, Prabhuji? Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Thank you, Mataji. I think Kirtika Mataji summarized most of the points what you were trying to tell us about the self-control and about the Paramahamsa stage and about different, the example of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Ramananda Rai was very nice. we could relate to all those things in terms of self-control, how it is important to use all the resources in the service of Krishna, so that that is the real detachment. So that's a very nice, Mataji. Thank you so much for the wonderful session. I request all the devotees to unmute and then chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra once in glorification of Her Grace Panchali Kar Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare,
Hare
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 Rama,
Rama,
Hare
Hare
Rama,
Rama,
Rama
Rama, Hare Hare. Shakapatarubyascha, Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namaः. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai,
Her Grace Panchali Kar Mataji ki jai.
Jai.
Thank you, Mataji, for giving me the
Thank you, Mataji.
opportunity.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Excellent class, Mataji.
Thank you, Mataji, for the opportunity. Thank
Hare
you.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.